Great, thank you. Thanks, Joanna. So thanks everyone for joining in today. So we really wanted to share with you guys just an introduction to how we think about communication at UNHCR's Innovation Service and how our thinking has really changed around this over the past few years, while giving you a few examples of how we're actually innovating our communications and trying to think about this space differently. So I'm going to hand over to Hans to go ahead and kick off with a bit of a background about our team for those of you who aren't familiar necessarily with the Innovation Service itself.
Thanks, Lauren, and hi everyone. So yeah, I'll mention a few notes about the team and how we operate, and then we'll get right into the comms bit. So the Innovation Service, UNHCR's Innovation Service, started around 2012 with a very small team. Initially, the focus was on private sector partnerships, products, trying to basically understand how external parties can support innovation in UNHCR. As the team grew, and the focus grew more towards themes, and so you've probably heard of innovation labs, and that's what kind of the team built. But we quickly realized that there was a more holistic and systems approach required in UNHCR. So instead of themes, a more kind of universal approach to innovation was established. So in the end, we got rid of the labs, and the team has now moved more towards a team that facilitates safe places and safe places for experimentation. And we also noticed that the challenge in UNHCR to innovate is actually not so technical or thematic, but about mindset and culture. Things like readiness to fail, appetite to experiment ideas and assumptions, and to think differently and view challenges from different points of views. So currently, just as an update, we have a new boss. Maybe you all know this, maybe not, who joined last June, around June, I think. So we're trying to kind of understand the strategy and what it kind of means to us, and trying to also expand a little bit and be more active with operations. Some of these things that reflect the general approach of UNHCR today. So if we go to the next slide, this is one of my kind of favorite kind of diagrams on innovation. It applies pretty well with the work of communication as well, strategic communication as well. So it's one way of in a way to define innovation in Innovation Service. So our work should predominantly be in the complex place. That's a place when we don't necessarily know what the challenge is, and we don't know what the solution might be. So we're in a place that's that requires innovation. In the obvious space, in the lower right corner, is the obvious space. This is a space where we already know what the best practice is. So, for example, how you file a travel claim. In the complicated space, in our context, it can be, for example, to provide refugee housing in a new environment, but knowing that we have certain rules and procedures to follow. In chaos, also a place for innovation. Any action is better than no action in this space. And disorders is a place you obviously want to leave. You want to quickly get away from, basically. This is, for example, when you wake up to a large sound, you don't know if it's basically the fire alarm or your alarm clock. So that's a space we want to get out from a personal, maybe also from an institutional point of view. So yeah, that's the kind of the basis of Innovation Service. Over to you, Lauren.
Makes sense. So how can communication serve as a tool to get people to care about the issues that matter most to us? Whether that's to gain influence on your issue, you'll need to understand like what actually compels people to invest their attention and emotion in these issues. So if you're going to make a difference, you have to try and understand how to make people care as a foundation to your strategy. So for us at UNHCR, we often ask, why is it so hard to get people to care about our message? Why don't people care about refugees? For us at the Innovation Service, we also often ask ourselves, why don't people care about innovation? If we can use these tools and these methods to help us do our work better, and therein have better impact for refugee communities, then getting buy-in should be really easy, right? But simply change is rarely straightforward, and I think those of us working across the UN really understand this, because we're working on these complex and abstract issues like protection or human rights or refugee rights. And the problem of effectively communicating in sort of that abstraction is also no stranger to people working in the space of innovation. And it really presents a huge barrier to getting buy-in and support for our work. So we think people are failing to act because they lack information. It's this idea, if we could just fill them in with all this great data, they will change. If they knew what I knew, then everything would be okay. We would just need to take a USB and upload this information into their brain, and then they would do what we wanted them to do. So there's a name for this. This idea of really transferring information as a communication strategy is called the information deficit model. And the term was introduced in the 1980s to describe this widely held belief about science communication, that much of the public's skepticism about science or new technology was rooted simply in a lack of knowledge, and that if the public knew more, that they would be more likely to embrace information. So this is a model that's also very much seen, I think, in the innovation world. But there's a better way to think about the information deficit model than reading this really long definition of what it actually is. So this unicorn, as lovely as it may be, it doesn't exist. It never has. And the information deficit model was never real either. It was debunked almost as early as it was discovered. It doesn't work, and people will not change just by giving them more information. But what we've seen is that this perspective persists, not just in the scientific community, but we see this across nonprofits, marketing, and public relations. And many of the foremost public relations and advertising agencies will still report to clients purely on impressions or the number of people who have been exposed to their message. And in the early days, we were very much working off of the idea of the information deficit model and how we were communicating about innovation internally as well. So over to you, Hans.
Yeah. So the question is it ever enough to know more about something, and is information alone enough for us? So for example, as an example, if, for example, the goal was to raise awareness among new parents of the importance of immunizing their children, is it just enough for parents to know that it's important? And so I would like to ask the audience, but I'm going to just answer myself, and the obvious answer is obviously no. So in a way, what we're trying to do is the ultimate goal here, I think, is to try to influence the behavior of people so that people take action. So what we learned, maybe next slide, Lauren. So what we learned in our line of work was that awareness raising is not enough. And like Lauren said, people don't act because they don't know. It's more about knowing how to act, how they can act. So we wondered, how can we get people to care more about innovation and act more creatively? And we started with providing, for example, examples of guidance to experimentation. And for us, it's quite important to note that we are, us as a team, we're not necessarily here to innovate, but to provide that pathway for for behavioral change, and facilitate that path for action. Lauren?
Yeah. So in reality, people don't act because they don't care, but it's often because they don't know how. We were really telling our colleagues simply be more innovative or be more creative, as if this translated to new behaviors and their work. And at the end, most people hate change anyways. They hate changing their habits, they hate getting up earlier, being healthier. And so big organizational change that is focused around these words like innovation and creativity is even more difficult. So as Hans mentioned, we wanted to think about how we could dig into some of the science and insights around this work to help us think about how to change our communications from just saying be more innovative to actually what are the behaviors behind that innovative mindset that we keep saying is so important. So I'm going to show you guys a video. It's likely to be a little bit laggy, but let's give it a go. And this is about essentially behavior change.
Psychologists know that there are two systems in our brains, the rational system and the emotional system.
Lauren, can you turn the sound up, please?
A great analogy for these two systems. He said, think of your brain as a human rider atop an elephant. The rider represents the rational system. That's the part of us that plans and problem solves. The rider might do some analyzing and decide, hey, I want to go that way. But it's the elephant, representing the emotional system, that provides the power for the journey. The rider can try to lead the elephant or drag the elephant, but if these two ever disagree, who would you bet on? The elephant has a 6-ton weight advantage, and it's exactly that power imbalance that makes adopting new behaviors very hard. If you want this duo to head a new direction, you also need to think about the path, which represents the external environment. This duo is more likely to complete a journey if you can shorten the distance and remove any obstacles in their way. So bottom line, if you want to lead change, you've got to do 3 things. Give direction to the rider, knowledge of how to get to the destination. You've got to motivate the elephant, which means tapping into emotion. And finally, you need to shape the path to allow for easy progress. That's how change happens.
All right, well, hopefully you guys got some of that, if any of it.
Lauren, I think a couple of people were struggling to hear, so if you could just maybe in 3 sentences the main takeaways from the video, in case people couldn't hear the sound properly.
Yeah, absolutely. So the main point here is that for behavior change, you have to have that rational sort of approach to how you're communicating, but also being able to speak to the emotional part of the way people think. So maybe some of you guys have heard about this idea of 2 parts of our brain, system 1 and system 2, and they're often fighting against each other. And so the idea is that we use communications by speaking to not only that rational part of us, but the emotional part of us. And that big picture hands-off leadership isn't likely to work in a change situation, because the hardest part of change, sort of that paralyzing part that you saw the elephant as, is precisely in the details, the communication, and how decisions are made. So we think that resistance is often this lack of clarity, but really people just need to be told, you know, this is the way to do things differently. And we really wanted to embed this way of thinking, focused more on behavior change into our work. So about 2.5 years ago, we did a general stakeholder internal analysis alongside 2 researchers, and realized that our communications was really packed with jargon and stereotypes. And as we've mentioned, we were really telling why innovation was so important and so great, but not explaining the how behind it. So in that enthusiasm for innovation, we realized that we were really missing an opportunity to actually meaningfully engage our colleagues in the work. So as Hans spoke about, the innovation service, our ultimate aim is to create an enabling environment for innovation to flourish. And this includes equipping staff with the knowledge and resources and skills that they need to use innovation as a tool to solve challenges. But we were very much raising awareness about innovation and not helping our colleagues find new and better ways of working. So we were working in this abstraction, as we've kept mentioning, when we should have been shaping intentional, deliberate, and importantly, meaningful communications. So this is when we really started to shift from just communicating about innovation to innovating how we communicate. We were trying to bring transparency to our processes. We were trying to move away from this idea of let's just put out an announcement when we start something and put out another blog post when we finish. But trying to understand what that messy middle looks like and what people are actually doing behind the experimentation and how that can be embedded as tools to think about creative ways of working in UNHCR was really crucial to this change. So yeah, we began trying to work out how to make staff and colleagues care more about innovation by relying on what science tells us about how the human mind, behavior, and society work. And we were trying to figure out where our communications would have the most impact. And this really started a new journey of experimentation for the team and trying to rethink how we communicate our work specifically internally. So we kind of hit the reset button and we were asking ourselves these 4 questions before crafting our communication strategy. And this framework has really helped us to move beyond thinking about innovation from just our team's point of view and this sort of group where, you know, the buy-in for innovation already exists. But it's also helped us dig into some of the beliefs and behaviors that we wanted to change within the organization that supported new ways of working. And so we've used this to not only think about our communication strategy, but we've also built a number of bespoke communication strategies for specific projects that we're working on, but also working with teams across the organization to use this as well to really dig into what they're actually trying to change and who are the people that they want to take action. Over to you, Hans.
Thank you. So a few months back, we established our recent comms strategy, and I would say in that the key takeaway from this is to make innovation more visible, accessible, and actionable for UNHCR colleagues. So this is basically how we wish to approach our communication and strategic design work. And so Lauren, if you go to the next slide. So in our comms work, we have a pretty strong emphasis on social, behavioral, and cognitive science, just to understand better how we can actually improve our comms work. So on the slides, you can see some of the objectives we have laid out, and as Johannes told everyone, we will share these slides. So don't worry if you can't read every bit. So on the next slides, we have the key objectives, I think. And they're manifold, but I'd like to kind of emphasize here that the last bit, which is to build a communication culture within our team, where everyone can access and apply science-driven communication methodologies. And I think this has been quite important for our team, for us to, as a general approach, general way to approach our work, not only in communication, but also in innovation. So if we go to the next slide, so I want to talk a little bit about how we how we collaborate and what we do, and basically also what we don't do, just to give some kind of context to it. I'll speak a little bit later about collaboration, but basically what we try to do is support colleagues, teams in UNHCR in new ways that's related to innovation and communication. And we try to apply creativity in every step of the way. So with approaches that are new to people or to the organization. So we support testing assumptions. We have methodologies. We help our colleagues. There are some still pretty strong myths about innovation in UNHCR. We try to emphasize that we are not the team that should be modernizing the organization, but really look into things that are related to innovation. So we try to separate modernization and innovation in UNHCR. Also, often we get asked to do things on behalf of teams, and to them we say, we're not the innovators. We try to support and facilitate innovation within teams and with colleagues. We don't do apps or push technology per se. Try to be a process oriented, not so solutions oriented. And so next slide. So this is an example of a comms/innovation collaboration we did. Relatively early on, we realized that inclusion, diversity, and gender equity are core to innovation. Without this, innovation doesn't really work in our sector or in our organization. So we launched an exploration with the inclusion, diversity, and gender equity team to see what this meant for us, at the same time using kind of our platform to support the inclusion team in their work. So we created stories, audio interviews, and published them in print and web. And we found this type of collaboration quite important, as it strengthened both teams' value propositions. So that's an example of how we work on comms. Later on, I'll have another example with the ethics office. But over to you for now, Lauren.
Thanks. So another area of work that we do is just undertaking research. For us, the first step in the innovation process is having a well-defined challenge to the problem that you're trying to solve. So we work with and collaborate with teams internally on parallel challenges, and to really dive into the research of what already exists to help us inform those problems around communication. One of these recently that we're still working on is about getting buy-in and support for your ideas. We realized that this idea of getting buy-in and influencing was really a continuous issue that was highlighted by UNHCR's Innovation Fellows. And so our fellows are UNHCR staff that we bring along for a 12-month journey of exploring a specific challenge that they've identified in the field or at headquarters. And so we began digging into what science and research and peer-reviewed academic research actually told us about how to build support internally. And right now we're currently developing a framework that will be shared internally but also externally about how people can use what is already out there to drive support for their ideas and their strategies. We've also found that building support and credibility for innovation internally can be used by partnering with teams outside of the organization. We call this sort of this outside-in strategy. So when we're having a difficult time getting people within the institution to take us seriously, or to even buy into our ideas of innovation, we've tried to shift perspectives to building influence outside of the organization. So an example of how we did this intentionally was partnering with the Stanford Social Innovation Review last year on a series on essentially highlighting how innovation operates within UNHCR. So we brought in colleagues from the diversity and inclusion team. We brought in refugees to contribute to this. We brought in colleagues working on projects like the Innovation Fund, but we also brought colleagues, for example, from IFRC to contribute to these articles, to basically highlight our lessons learned and bring transparency to how we as an organization are working internally on these issues, and then essentially influence colleagues through this. We also spent a lot of time working with colleagues across the organization, and particularly in our operations, to highlight stories of innovation. So this idea of documenting bright spots is really important to us, because again, it's really refocusing the innovation conversation to one that is less about us as a service, and more about refugees and colleagues who are the true innovators, and who can actually see themselves in these stories that we're telling. And so this comes to sort of my last point on this, which is also telling the right kinds of stories. And so Joanna mentioned at the beginning of this that we had done some reflection on the types of stories we were telling, and part of our shift really involved rethinking the narratives we were pushing out. So, I mean, research tells us that storytelling is one of the most powerful tools that we have with regards to helping people absorb new perspectives. So we really wanted to see how we could use storytelling as a way to influence and promote innovation across the organization. One of the ways we've done this is to think about changing traditional narratives on innovation, and to help motivate our advocates, and to share counter narratives or stories that may surprise people or break common assumptions around innovation. So we tried to provide a platform for often, missing voices or unnamed voices in the organization to tell their stories, to break down those more traditional narratives around what innovation looks like, whether that's, the Steve Jobs or the lone inventor in the basement, to create a more holistic but also truthful narrative on innovation in UNHCR. For example, in our team, we have two women who are actually driving the innovation services data and artificial intelligence work. And this is an area of work that's often associated with men. So we've tried to share not only their work, but experiences to challenge that narrative that only men successfully pursue science and technology careers, as well as sort of the traditional ideas about what an innovation actually looks like in the humanitarian sector. Hans, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so to recap, we're trying to basically capture and facilitate innovation also within comms activities. And one of the key things, as mentioned, is to collaborate and partner with our colleagues and teams. And so this is an important aspect of our work, to basically go beyond the boundaries of traditional comms and create curiosity. And one of the kind of key benefits of this, obviously, is that when people see other teams, so to speak, do innovation, it has a different impact than, for example, seeing the innovation service itself trying to innovate. So collaborations are important to influence and also push forward our strategy as comms design team, and ideally it benefits all people involved, including the organization at large. And again, we really try to collaborate when there's an element of complex challenges ahead of us, or elements of experimentation that can be explored. So as an example, if we go to the next slide, I just want to mention very quickly about collaboration that we did with our ethics office. So similarly to inclusion and diversity work, we realized that ethics is one of the core issues and challenges of innovation. So whether we're looking at artificial intelligence or the aspects of experimenting in emergency settings, ethics is crucial. So we learn a tremendous amount about innovation while supporting and working with the ethics office. And it is a good example of how we can support each other and strengthen our value propositions. So an example of a collaboration we did was on their Code of Conduct Dialogue campaign, where we worked together with this artist who we have been working with for a few years now, to really create these non-traditional, complex and different visual communication pieces to challenge the way people maybe view ethics office and their work. And you can see also the artist's work spread around this presentation as well. So if the last slide for me, the pause one, yeah. So what we worked basically with ethics office on was we did design workshops. We worked on this. We worked on a few internal campaigns. One of them is called Future of Ethics, where we basically look at the future, or we look to the future to try to communicate and understand what ethics may look like in HR and in the future. So this is a project that's ongoing, and then we're working with different artists and designers, and obviously also the ethics office. We also do different types of research work, such as systems thinking projects, and stories, capacity building efforts, and different types of visual communication products, basically everything from posters to postcards. Over to you, Lauren.
Yeah, so I mean, that's it for us. I know we wanted to give a good amount of time in case people had questions. So yeah, over I guess to Joanna. If there are any specific questions people may have, and I mean, we have a lot of resources that we can also share. I mean, we have a blog that we share a lot of these innovation stories on. We also have another page that's dedicated specifically to looking at the journey that we've been on to try and understand how to think about communications differently. And I also want to say that this is by no means been a singular journey that the innovation service has been on. It's required an immense amount of input and collaboration with the academic sector, with researchers, with writers, with artists, and really I think that collaboration has been so beneficial in helping us bring different ways of thinking about communications into the organization. So yeah, that's it from us.